Good afternoon, it is 12:33, coming towards the end of my break, and decided to cover a little driving topic. It's something that I've been thinking about and something that maybe some of you guys might actually want to know, which is, what is the hardest type of trucking job that you can do, in the UK? Now, I think that there are a bunch of factors that we have to consider when we ask ourselves, what is the hardest trucking job? We'll start with the first one, which is distance traveled. If you want to look at distance traveled, then obviously the European and continental work would be quite difficult because you're traveling very, very far. The other factor that I wanted to consider is distance traveled or time spent away from home, maneuvering the vehicle itself, and then frequency of maneuvers would be your third factor. Fourth factor would be the amount of walking that you have to do during the day, and the fifth factor would be the amount of lifting using your own physical body. Would be the fifth factor. So if you consider a job like your European continental work, you're going to be carrying a load on an articulated lorry across Europe. You're going to be spending a large amount of time away from home, but the amount of maneuvers that you're going to be doing is relatively less. You get to your destination, you'll probably need to maneuver into a loading bay, and then afterwards you'll get unloaded. So in terms of maneuvering, I wouldn't say that it's particularly difficult, apart from the fact that you're obviously maneuvering a Class 1 vehicle, so you need to be able to maneuver an articulated lorry, so you've got to have your Class 1 license. But the frequency of maneuvers is less. So as long as you can handle the long distance, as long as you don't fall asleep at the wheel, as long as you're okay with the whole motorway driving for several hours, days even, then you should be okay in that type of job. Maneuvering the vehicle itself, the hardest type of job that you can get involved in the UK would be heavy haulage. So moving extremely heavy loads, extremely long loads, and extremely wide loads. There are special kinds of lorries that have axles which can rotate, so your back axles can rotate, and that means if you're getting around a corner and you can't quite make it, you still need a few more inches, you're not going to make it with your current length, you're not going to make it by shunting or coming in wider, then the wheels, the back axle can be rotated and the entire back can be moved so you can get around. Now, operating one of those takes a hell of a lot of skill. You need to apprentice for a while, you need to know how to secure the load onto the vehicle and then obviously travel with it. And if an extremely heavy load like a tank or a train or train carriage or something like that, then you'll probably be teamed up with other people who will drive in front and behind you and let you know what's going on. Planning the route is obviously very important, so before you set out you've got to make sure that you plan the route properly and that you have gone down those roads and checked that it's suitable for the load that you're trying to transport. So in terms of maneuvering the vehicle itself, obviously long, wide and heavy vehicles are the most difficult to maneuver, and therefore when we consider the single factor of maneuvering a large vehicle, that would be the hardest. Third, frequency of maneuvers. You would have to say Class 2 multi-drop involving food. So you're talking about sort of 14 to 20 drops a day, same sort of drop work that I do regularly at this company, and in central London. So 14 to 20 drops in a highly built up area like a city means that you're going to have a high frequency of maneuvers. You're going to come into contact with a lot of pedestrians, a lot of cyclists, a lot of other road users, a lot of bollards, a lot of hazards. And so therefore the vigilance that's required in terms of concentration and awareness is going to be extremely high in a Class 2 multi-drop job involving food. As far as lifting is concerned, again, Class 2 multi-drop involving food is different to just a regular Class 2 multi-drop job. There's a Tesco behind me, a Tesco Express. Tesco Express they often have class 2 vehicles. This particular one has a class 1 that reverses into the loading bay, because I've seen it. But they have class 2 vehicles that also deliver to your Tesco Express, but it's easy, because you only need to use your tail lift to take the cages off, stick your cones up around the vehicle, wheel the cages off, push them into the store and go to your next drop. So physically you're not doing a lot of lifting. But in a class 2 multi-drop job like mine involving food, there may be lots of boxes that need to be picked, then they need to be put on a barrow or arranged in a cage if they're not already in a cage, or you need to split the cage up, then you have to take some stuff off, put it on the barrow, take it into the establishment. The establishment might have a kitchen that's downstairs or upstairs or through you know, the building somehow. And so therefore, you know, those jobs physically are going to be quite challenging, because you're going to be lifting, you know, essentially unloading 3.5 ton off your lorry. Now some of that will be in cages, a lot of that will be in cages, but a lot of it you'll have to do on your own. You'll have to lift that. So in terms of lifting, that is hard. Now what I'm doing right now, the DEFRA routes, is not a normal job. It's a temporary job. It's just going on right now because of the pandemic. That's what I have coined ultra multi drop, 50 to 65 drops a day. You may not be lifting you may not be lifting a lot for each drop. It's just one single box containing a few tins and bread and veg and all that, but the amount of walking that you're going to be doing, because you're strategically placing the lorry in the middle of your drops and kind of walking them all over the place, is quite demanding. I mean, I regularly walk more than 5 or 6 miles a day when I'm doing this particular job. So in terms of walking, like I said, the class 2 jobs that are involved, you know, like this temporary one where you're going around residential areas and you're doing a lot of walking, that would be the hardest. Don't forget, class 2 multi-drop might not be the biggest vehicles, but they're absolutely massive for the roads that you're traveling in, and that can make all the difference in terms of difficulty. If you're having to lift a lot of stuff when you get to your drop, unload, get it into the kitchen, it's going to physically tire you out. That means that your concentration levels are going to decrease, which means you need to be even more vigilant when you get back in the vehicle, because you are tired and you are more prone to making errors and then obviously getting in collisions. So that is another factor that you have to consider. So we've talked about quite a few factors here. Distance traveled is not going to be very high on a class 2 multi-drop, so that's not going to be very difficult. Amount of load that you're actually lifting with your body is going to be highest in class 2 multi-drop involving food, so it ticks the boxes there. Frequency of maneuvers is, again, class 2 multi-drop is going to be your hardest. Operating the largest vehicles possible on these type of small roads, again, makes the challenge more difficult. So even though your vehicle's only 11 meters long, you are operating within a very, very confined space, and therefore more hazards, more maneuvers. And those 3 factors of walking, lifting and frequency of maneuvers means that there aren't many other jobs that tick 3 out of 5 categories. But the fact that 3 out of 5 categories are the hardest in a class 2 multi-drop involving food means that I have decided that probably class 2 multi-drop involving food is probably the hardest type of trucking job out there in the UK, and hence the reason why so few people decide to stay at companies like Brakes and Bidfood, because they realize that they might get paid slightly less in another job, but it'll be a hell of a lot easier. So if you're thinking about becoming a class 2 driver and you want to jump directly into the deep end like I did, then you can go for a class 2 multi-drop involving food. If you're doubting your abilities and you're not quite confident with doing class 2 multi-drop involving food in central London, then I would recommend not going for that as your first job, because it may motivate you to just not do trucking at all. You know, it might be so difficult and you might have such a hard time with it that you may quit trucking. I've seen it happen before in the short amount of time that I've been at the company. Drivers walk in the door, they do their training, they go out there, they rip a fence off a school, and or do something else, and then they're just like, I've had it. I'm not doing this anymore. I'd rather do something else. So look at the 5 factors, see what it is. Oh, there's a 6th factor, which is the load that you're carrying. How dangerous is the load that you're carrying? So for example, transporting things like fuel, kerosene, anything flammable, chemicals, again, it's a different kind of difficulty. So if you want to consider that single factor, then obviously vehicles carrying dangerous loads would be the most dangerous jobs, if you want to consider that one single factor. But if the fact that class 2 multi-drop involving food ticks 3 of the 6, I would say it's the hardest. It also has the highest turnover rate in trucking, which is why they were hiring when I decided to go for the job as a new driver. But you know, I think I've settled in fairly well. To be honest, I think I've taken to it like a duck to water, basically. It doesn't bother me. I can do it, and I've leaned down anyway. I've lost a lot of weight because of the job requires me to be leaner, fitter, moving consistently throughout the day, and I feel good. I feel healthy. So yeah, that's about it. I hope this has helped anybody who's thinking about becoming a truck driver, class 2 or whatever. Peace.